I'm Doug Boynton, and you're listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition, where we highlight the week's news and stories happening in our area. In this week's program, we close out February with plenty to talk about. WHRO climate reporter Katherine Hafner sat down with Newport News Mayor Phillip Jones after his appointment to the EPA's Local Government Advisory Committee. We'll listen into the highlights.
Whether it's Newport News or Lambert's Point in Norfolk or things in other southern states or cities, you often see marginalized communities next to pig farms or sewage farms or coal terminals.
Also, the Nansemond Indian Nation is opening a second clinic in Newport News, and it's cleanup time. An $8 million grant has been awarded to remove old fishing gear around the Chesapeake Bay. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. As we close out February, here's what's happening. The Virginia African American Cultural Center will receive $1 million in this year's state budget. WHRO's Sienna Morales has more on what that means for the center.
The Cultural Center is a Virginia Beach-based nonprofit that preserves and celebrates the state's Black history. It's based out of an office right now, but it could begin construction on a permanent location before the end of next year. The $1 million state grant will kick off another round of fundraising. Amid federal pushback on diversity initiatives, Board Chair Amelia Ross Hammond says the center is busier than ever.
Actually, we have even more programs than we can handle right at this second because people now are growing more interested in it.
An orchestra concert, golf tournament, and lecture series are on the calendar for the upcoming months. Establishing a physical location has been in the works for over 7 years, and Ross Hammond envisions it as a community hub for celebrating diversity and sharing different perspectives. Sienna Morales, WHRO News.
Up next, we expect the water we drink to be clean. However, in our very real world, that's not always the case. The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality uncovered dozens of sites across the Commonwealth that contain harmful chemicals in drinking water. WHRO's Katherine Hafner reported the story.
Lawmakers last year prompted the state to study Virginia waters for a class of man-made chemicals known as PFAS, or forever chemicals. They've been used in a wide range of consumer products like shampoo, paint, and nonstick cookware. Sampling detected PFAS in water all around the state, including the Pocosin River, near the Great Dismal Swamp, and in the Pungo area of Virginia Beach. 3 spots in Hampton Roads are considered high priorities for further investigation. That's Lee Hall and Harwood's Mill in Newport News and the Moores Bridges Water Treatment Plant in Norfolk. DEQ plans to map out those areas and figure out where the chemicals are coming from. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
As we continue to follow the tragic story involving 2 Virginia Beach police officers killed during a traffic stop last weekend, WHRO's Michelle Hankerson has the latest on how support is coming in from across the Commonwealth, bringing light to a dark time for the city of Virginia Beach.
25-year-old Cameron Gervin and 30-year-old Christopher Reese are the 16th and 17th Virginia Beach officers to be killed in the line of duty. Chief Paul Newdigate reflected on the emotional impact during a weekend press conference.
And if you know Virginia Beach, we're a big city, but we're really just a small community. And I will tell you, this community is hurting. So the outpouring of support is giving us some comfort at this time.
Gervin and Reese pulled over John McCoy III for expired plates late February 21st. McCoy shot both officers, ran from the scene, and fatally shot himself. The officers died at 2 different local hospitals. Officials didn't release personal information about the officers, but Gervin's wife Jessica shared a public Facebook post saying she and Cameron were looking forward to becoming parents in the coming weeks. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
A regional agency is almost done building an ultra-high-speed internet network across Southside Hampton Roads. WHRO's Ryan Murphy reports the hope is that it will draw tech companies who need to move mountains of data quickly.
5 cities in Southampton Roads are spending $24 million to lay more than 100 miles of fiber optic internet cables. Marcellus Nixon manages the project as the head of the Southside Network Authority. He says that loop of cable will serve as the backbone of a new high-speed network and should be finished this summer after 2 years of construction.
So it's not just about internet access, it's also about high-paying jobs, bringing those to the area, and basically taking a limitation off of any type of economic development opportunity as well.
The regional fiber loop will eliminate bottlenecks caused by older internet infrastructure and will mainly serve large businesses. The authority has plans to run distribution lines off the main loop to eventually connect residential areas to this ultra-fast internet. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Newport News Mayor Phillip Jones was recently appointed to the Environmental Protection Agency's Local Government Advisory Committee. He will serve through next January. WHRO's Katherine Hafner chatted with Jones about what he's hoping for the role.
Heading into this appointment, what do you see as the greatest environmental challenges facing Newport News right now?
Number one, there's coal. There's been a combination of things that have led to air pollution in that community for a few decades. Coal is the biggest because it's a giant coal pile and people can feel the coal on their clothes when they hang it to dry or on their cars. So it's been going on for a long time, but I think people are just starting to get fed up. Number two, we have flooding. I think we get calls the most about potholes and flooding. I think that's what every mayor gets phone calls about. And people are just saying, listen, when I go to my backyard, a little bit of rain and I can't go outside, and now it's in my house and now it's ruined. What are some things that you can do? We're just going to make sure that we can help mitigate not only the coal, but also all that flooding that happened in people's backyards.
I understand your involvement with the EPA started when the city applied for a federal grant to address coal dust. Tell me about how that came together.
When you look at some ways that we can capture fugitive coal dust, there's really studies show us two ways. We can do a coal dome, which happens in Europe. It's very expensive. And there's a giant, dome over the coal, which, as you can see, we have a major highway, and it's going to just look very, very odd. Or you can have a coal fence. That's cheaper. You can put that near the water, and that's able to capture 80 to 90% of the coal. All of that is going to require federal funds. We're looking at anywhere between $12 to $20 million. So the city, in December of last year, of 2024, we applied for a $20 million community change grant. That would have been the impetus for us to get started, with the plans and the site development, et cetera. Unfortunately, due to multiple reasons, we were unable to get that grant, but we remain undeterred. We're going to find ways to mitigate that fugitive coal dust. It's going to take a little bit of time. So when we were going through the grant process, we talked to the EPA officials multiple times. I went to DC and met with one of the undersecretaries, and they expressed hey, you're really interested in environmental justice and the EPA. We have a commission and we would love for you to serve. It took a little bit of paperwork to go through, but was excited to be appointed. And I think that is going to really help us with all EPA related things in Newport News.
You've talked about your commitment to environmental justice. What does that mean to you?
Whether it's Newport News or Lambert's Point in Norfolk or things in other southern states or cities, you often see marginalized communities next to pig farms or sewage farms or coal terminals. And that's going to probably have high rates of comorbidities of asthma and the like. And I think we all want a future for our children and our grandkids that has clean air and clean water. It's all about fairness. Everyone, it does not matter what your political party, what you look like, or how much money that you make. Everyone deserves for them, their kids, and their grandkids to have access to clean water, clean air, and be able to just feel safe in their neighborhood. At the end of the day, that's it. I think sometimes we get politicized and polarized talking about things. It comes down to a fairness standard. Do you want your neighbor to have access to the same things that you have access to? That's it.
What do you hope to gain from your participation in the EPA committee?
The intent of the Local Government Advisory Committee is to help form national policies when it comes to environmental justice and other EPA-related things. What they're realizing is it doesn't matter if it's a county or a city or a tribal community, the people at the ground level, we have an ear to the community and they know that. And so it's really our time to talk directly to EPA officials about what we're seeing. With the change in administration, it has stalled a little bit, but we look forward to the next meeting and really being able to advocate because like I've said before, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. I'm going to continue to advocate for all residents of Newport News.
Still ahead on Weekly Edition, bird flu popping up on farms around the Delmarva Peninsula, and farmers are concerned. But first, a North Carolina Republican has filed a bill to remove diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives from state agencies. As WUNC's Brianna Atkinson reports, it follows the Trump administration's push to remove DEI from the federal government.
House Majority Leader Brendan Jones filed the bill. If approved, it would eliminate DEI programs and policies from state agencies. This includes related staff positions or offices, as well as required DEI training. The bill would also mandate the state auditor to conduct compliance audits. It states that if an agency employee willfully violates the policy, they could be charged with a Class 1 misdemeanor. And the bill would allow people to bring civil action for damages against employees who knowingly violate it. State agencies would also be prohibited from applying for grants or federal funds that require compliance with DEI policies. The bill has to pass in both chambers of the NC General Assembly and be signed by the governor in order to become law. I'm Brianna Atkinson.
Cannabis advocates have asked North Carolina Attorney General Jeff Jackson for legal clarity about the state's enforcement of different laws for smokable hemp products compared with traditional marijuana. WFAE's Steve Harrison has this report.
North Carolina is one of the strictest states in the nation when it comes to marijuana, but there are stores across the state selling THCA products, which, when smoked, have the same intoxicating effects as regular marijuana, whose active ingredient is Delta-9 THC. Cannabis advocate Barbara Gaskin says law enforcement can't tell the difference. She says minorities are being disproportionately arrested for intoxicating cannabis products.
No one should be punished for something that others are legally selling and making profit from.
The stores that sell THCA are largely unregulated by the state. I'm Steve Harrison.
Newport News residents will soon have more medical options. The Nansemond Indian Nation is preparing to open its second clinic in the southeastern part of the city. WHRO's Ryan Murphy has more.
The Nansemond Tribe's Fishing Point Healthcare can serve anyone using federal healthcare assistance like Medicaid. Lance Johnson is Fishing Point's CEO and says Native Americans across the country deal with higher poverty and worse health outcomes than average, something they share with residents of many pockets of Hampton Roads.
And that's really what we're trying to provide, is a high quality of care to an underserved population, including those who are non-Native.
The tribe acquired a community pharmacy in Southeast Newport News and will open a temporary office March 1st while it builds out the full clinic. Once the clinic is done, it will include doctors' and dentists' offices, physical therapy, and a medical lab. Fishing Point's also bought property on Church Street in Norfolk, where it will open another small clinic this summer. The tribe is eyeing additional locations in Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, Williamsburg, and Suffolk. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Governor Glenn Youngkin traveled to Northern Virginia this week to announce a new state-run initiative meant to get federal workers fired by the Trump administration jobs in the Commonwealth. WVTF's Brad Kuttner reported that story.
Federal workers make up hundreds of thousands of jobs in Virginia, about 10% of the state's workforce, according to a presentation from the House Emergency Committee on the impacts of federal workforce and funding reductions over the weekend. And as President Donald Trump and his advisor, Elon Musk, look to cut many of them, Governor Glenn Youngkin said he supported the idea, but is opening a new website to help those laid off.
The waste, fraud, and abuse is stunning and shocking, and everybody sees it. We know that it needs to get more efficient, and therefore there understandably will be some job dislocation.
The website, virginiahasjobs.com, opened Monday morning. It has information about upcoming virtual job fairs, can help folks apply for unemployment, and includes a, quote, job seeker toolkit, which has additional information about Virginia's workforce openings. Brian Slater is Youngkin's Secretary of Labor. He recently told reporters the governor's administration felt for those losing their jobs, but there are hundreds of thousands of openings for Virginians who are looking for them.
There's good jobs in county government and state government and the private sector. If there are Virginians who are laid off, we want to help them find a job.
But Virginia's Democratic Senate Majority Leader Scott Zureville said Monday he's heard from those who've lost federal jobs in his district, and they're angry.
The workers that I represent are looking for the governor to stand up and fight for them instead of taking a knee and putting up a website. People elect us to go to battle and fight when these things happen and not just capitulate.
Zureville added the blitz of firings have led to confusion that he fears could lead to a recession. Over in the House, the Emergency Committee has more meetings scheduled in the coming months. In Richmond, I'm Brad Kuttner.
Members of the Virginia General Assembly are considering the future of odd-year elections. WVTF's Michael Pope reports.
Ever since Virginia adopted a new constitution in 1850, election officials have had an odd tradition. Odd-year elections. Now, members of the General Assembly say it's time to rethink that tradition. Delegate Shelley Simons is a Democrat from Newport News who introduced a bill to study how Virginia could ditch odd-year elections.
I think people move to Virginia and they say, why do you have elections every single year? And there's a lot of burnout on behalf of voters. It's also costly, and it would be much more efficient to consolidate these elections if we can.
Republicans oppose the effort to ditch odd-year elections, and they worry Democrats are trying to rig the system. Here's Republican House Leader Todd Gilbert.
I think there are a number of us who smelled a rat in terms of what is behind this effort on the other side. Clearly, I think they have an advantage.
Changing state elections from odd to even years would involve a complicated transition, one that could have a governor with a 3-year term, or maybe a 5-year term. Members of the House and Senate will be taking 2 years to study how that transition works and if they want to make it happen. I'm Michael Pope.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
Jumping now to the Delmarva Peninsula, where the deadly bird flu has popped up in chicken houses. Chicken industry officials say farmers there are stressed and can lose money even if their flock isn't directly impacted. WHRO's Ryan Murphy breaks it down.
Recent outbreaks in wild bird populations have led to 9 positive cases at chicken farms on the Delmarva Peninsula since the start of 2025. One was in Virginia's Accomack County. When that happens, the infected flock is culled and that farmer is eligible for federal reimbursement. But farms within about 4 miles are also prohibited from bringing in new flocks until the farm at the center of the outbreak is cleared. James Fisher from the Delmarva Chicken Association says that can take as long as a couple of months.
Your annual income could be cut by a fourth or a fifth if that happens, and that's a problem.
Federal legislation introduced last week would help with that, extending aid to the nearby farms delaying their next crop of birds. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
The Virginia Institute of Marine Science is using an $8 million federal grant to remove derelict fishing gear throughout the Chesapeake Bay. WHRO's Katherine Hafner tagged along on some recent work out on the York River.
Ralph Bonneville is at the helm of a boat looking at a dark spot on his sonar screen. It shows the location of a crab pot abandoned at the river bottom.
You'll see that mark right there. We just marked a pot. It should be a pot right there.
Bonneville's a crabber who's working in the off-season to remove these pots, which can clog up waterways and entrap animals like turtles and diving ducks. He steers the boat up to the spot on the sonar and uses a rope drag system to pull up the cage. Bonneville says crabbers are trying harder than ever not to lose them in the first place.
It got so expensive now, if you miss one, we try to get it back.
The VIMS grant reaches wider than just Virginia. It's funding similar work in Florida, California, and the Pacific Island nation of Palau. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
The 1,000 Flowers installation at the Chrysler Museum opened this week with hope-filled origami flowers to encourage conversations about mental health. Kate Nowak reports for WHRO.
After the loss of her brother, Erica Hitchcock was inspired to create a project that made people feel less alone. After 40 origami flower-making workshops and hundreds of hands, Hitchcock says the support has been incredible.
Bringing in the arts and this, these beautiful flowers with written message of hope on them. It just brings some kind of a breath of fresh air to a topic and an illness that is just very, very difficult to maneuver.
Proceeds benefit the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, Coastal Virginia, which provides free local mental health resources. The installation will travel to the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art in Virginia Beach and area locations with programming about mental health. Kate Nowak, WHRO News.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the military will trim 8% from its budget over each of the next 5 years. Jay Price of the American Homefront Project reports on one target that has already been named: climate change programs.
It was the first thing, in fact, that Hegseth mentioned during a recent news conference when asked about the cuts.
Look at a lot of the climate programs that have been pursued at the Defense Department.
The way he sees it, that's not part of the mission.
The Defense Department is not in the business of climate change, solving the global thermostat. We're in the business of deterring and winning wars.
But that business of deterring enemies and winning wars means the military has to plan years, even decades ahead. Decades in which climate change is expected to swamp some coastal installations, increase the number of days it's too hot to train outside, force changes to ships and military equipment, and shape the nature of combat and where conflicts occur. That's why Pentagon leaders have long incorporated climate change into their planning.
There's essentially nothing that the Department of Defense is doing related to climate change that is a purely environmental purpose.
Tom Ellison is with the Center for Climate and Security in Washington, D.C. He says Congress has long supported the military's need to plan for climate change, what he calls a rare bipartisan bright spot on the topic. That's because for the military, it's an immediate practical matter.
If you want a capable and healthy U.S. military and fighting force, you need to understand things like how is extreme heat and pollution affecting the health of your troops? When climate change changes the chemistry of the ocean, how is my submarine sonar going to work differently? How will changes in humidity affect the lift capacity of my transport aircraft, right? How will climate change affecting crop yields cause food price spikes and instability?
Also, building resilience into the military's infrastructure planning has become critical. Increasingly common and more powerful storms have caused billions of dollars in damage to installations. Some key coastal bases already experience regular flooding, so new barracks, say, or piers for ships must be designed for higher sea levels. And experts say some, like the Marine Corps' iconic Parris Island, will eventually have to be abandoned and their missions shifted elsewhere. It's early in the budget-cutting process, but one sign of what might come is the disappearance of an official online portal that helped military leaders plan for a changing climate. Carolyn Baxter, now retired from the Defense Department, oversaw the portal's creation.
That portal was meant to give people resources and one place to go for those resources that they can then use to figure out, all right, I'm a logistician. What do I need to know about changing sea level rise? How do I make a decision about that? I'm an installation manager. How is sea level rise going to affect any expansion of the installation that I'm supposed to manage?
The Defense Department didn't respond to a request for information about why the portal was taken down and what climate-related programs will be eliminated. Baxter says the information the portal provided can't be ignored by military planners without a cost.
There is a math and physics about climate change, and that has been true for decades, that has made what they do harder and will continue to make what they do harder. Norfolk flooding, Annapolis flooding 40 times a year, wildfires taking the Kentucky National Guard off mission, stuff like that.
In the real world, she says, heat and sea level rise and storms are increasingly destructive forces that the U.S. military must deal with, enemies that can't be ignored. I'm Jay Price, reporting.
This story was produced by the American Homefront Project, a public media collaboration that reports on American military life and veteran. You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from WHRO's Nick McNamara, Ryan Murphy, Michelle Hankerson, Katherine Hafner, Kate Nowak, and Steve Walsh, WUNC's Brianna Atkinson, WFAE's Steve Harrison, WVTF's Brad Kuttner and Michael Pope, also Jay Price with the American Homefront Project, and thanks as always to Connor Worley, who produced today's show. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get your news updates at WHRO.org, the WHRO Reports podcast feed, or on the WHRO smartphone app. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.